Welcome to the Manny Chi Outdoors YouTube channel. Upon your request, I'm going to start uploading more. And, I usually just do kind of hype videos. But now, I want to do something that's a little more instructional for you guys. So, the feathered hook deal. Like, what's up with feathered hooks? Front feather, rear feather, both. I'm going to share a little insight of why I started using front feathered hooks on my large glide baits. So these are a couple baits that are pretty staple in my hard bait glide collection and guide service. All right. One is the Slide Swimmer 250 by Depps. The other one is the Hinkle Trout by Andrew Hinkle. This is a 10-inch bait. This is 11? 11. Another one I use a lot is the Mother, a 12-inch bait. Now, one of the things that I started noticing when I swim this out in our lakes, and at that time a lot of our lakes had an average of, I would say, 6 to 8 pound fish. They can take down this 250 like it's nothing. When you're swimming it right, they roll on it hard. There's really no other advantage that I felt like I needed except maybe changing out the hooks. I usually go with like a Gamakatsu round bend bronze hook, link in the description. When these first came out, when we first started fishing them, they all were like the Japanese versions. And they were all coming with front feathers, but they were big chicken feathers. When I started throwing the Mother and the Hinkle Trout, I started noticing a little bit different of a behavior. Okay, I would see all the body language coming from the fish that they wanted to eat the bait. And what I mean by that, I'm swimming my bait in a tight Z as opposed to a big lazy S. Some of the basic body language, if you just see a fish, let's say the Slide Swimmer is now the bass. This thing's going side to side. And if I'm seeing that bass just kind of swim straight line underneath the bait, hanging in its blind zone, then I kind of know that that fish isn't too excited about it. He probably won't commit. Just kind of take a mental note of it or write it in your log where you saw him, what time of the day it was, and you can kind of go back and start figuring out where these fish hunt or where they hang out, right? You can come back and target at another time. Maybe then it'll be ready to eat. The behavior you want to see is the one where this bait is going, doing its glides, and the fish comes out and you can just tell it's hot because it's dipping and diving with the bait. Like it's woom, woom, woom. It's trying to track it down. And eventually it kind of gets into sync with it and whoop, speeds up and bam, plants an attack on it. But what I started seeing with the big 11-inch Hinkle Trout was a behavior where they were displaying the signs that they were going to eat it, but it's almost like they would come up, they'd come up underneath it or to its sides. I could see kind of like a frustration, like their fins were moving, their gills were popping, but they were kind of like, ooh, where do I start? It's kind of like if you get a big tomahawk steak, right, with the bone hanging out, or a big giant burger, and they bring it to the table, and it's like, oh man, that thing looks great. Like I'm going to devour this thing, but where do I start? Where do I take my first bite? Let me get a knife so I can maybe cut that burger in half and eat it from the corner. That looks like it might fit in my mouth easier. I feel like the same thing was going on with these larger glide baits. I started kind of looking at, back then on my Instagram, a lot of the Japanese accounts. Most of these came from baits, were coming from Japan, the Depps, etc. So I looked on their accounts and a lot of them had feathers on their baits still. They didn't take that same mentality that we took and saying, oh, take the feathers off, let's go more subtle or more natural. Maybe they can use that feather as like a targeting device. And that's when I started tying feathers onto the front hook of a bait like the Hinkle, the Mother. Why not both? Because I don't really want them targeting the back. The scariest thing that can happen with one of these glide baits is to end up with like a fish coming on the rear hook. There's a lot of weight and leverage here for them to shake you off. So what I want is for that front hook hookup. Right? I want them coming in on this one, and then maybe this one for insurance kind of stab somewhere else. So I said, okay, I don't want to do the big nasty chicken feathers of those other pre-tied hooks. I'm going to do this subtle. And that's what I want to share with you guys, some of the basics on how to tie these flies. Because there's definitely a right way and a wrong way. Now, what makes it right or wrong? To me, this is kind of like a almost wrong way to do this. All right, we have some improper dimensions where we have a lot of this hackle, is what this kind of feather is called. We have a lot of this hackle stacked up in some spots it's not, so it's kind of uneven. As you see on this top one, there's kind of like, looks like there's three or four right there. This side has like maybe one. As you can see, they fold over. That's called fouling. You know, when the feathers foul on the hook because they're too long. So there's too much going on back here, and in your cast, in your swimming, it'll wrap over, and then you end up coming back with these, you know, like funny looking feathers instead of something that's more streamlined, a little bit, I don't want to say more natural because it's not like any of these have feathers, but more subtle. It's enough to give them something to target, a little bit of secondary action on that, but it's not like this, you know, this thing that's like causing frustration and getting all over the place. Oh shit! Yeah! And the mother! That's a mother toter.